please, don't let my mom die," the little girl begged, not knowing he was a millionaire and the man in the black suit wasn't expecting anyone. But there he was, inside his luxury car parked next to the public hospital, staring blankly into the void. It was as if the entire world were a foreign stage to him, a weary spectator of a play that no longer interested him. His name was Daniel, though that night he couldn't even remember who he used to be before hardening his heart. He was fidgeting with the ring he no longer wore on his finger, spinning it between his hands, when an unexpected crash struck the window. At first he thought it was a thief, or someone wanting to cause trouble, but when he turned his head, what he saw left him speechless. A soaked little girl with disheveled braids and enormous eyes full of terror, looking at him from the other side of the glass as if her life depended on it. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, and her voice, almost drowned by the rain, cut through his chest like a knife. "Sir, please, don't let my mom die, please." Daniel didn't know what to say. The silence that followed was so thick that not even the storm outside could break it. And yet something inside him, something he believed had died years ago, began to stir violently. It was as if those words had shattered the cold shell he had worn all his life. The little girl was still there, her forehead pressed against the glass, breathing heavily with trembling hands. And although everything in his mind screamed at him to start the car and leave, his hands refused to obey. He slowly rolled down the window, and the girl repeated, now through tears, "Don't let her die, she's all I have." The words echoed inside him, like an impossible echo to ignore. He looked at the girl, then at the illuminated hospital in the distance, and a sharp pain in his chest forced him to act. For the first time in years, he felt alive. If you've ever wondered what can push someone to risk everything for a stranger, what can make a cold heart burn again, I invite you to stay. This story isn't just about saving a life, but about learning to live again. Subscribe right now so you don't miss a single detail of this intense story. Daniel opened the car door, and with a sigh that seemed like a lament, gestured for the girl to get in. She obeyed without thinking, as if she already knew that this stranger would change her destiny forever. As the engine roared and the hospital lights grew closer, he couldn't imagine the scars that night would bring to the surface, nor the unexpected love he was about to find. And so it all began. The hospital doors opened with a metallic screech when Daniel carried the girl in his arms and set her down on the cold reception floor. His black suit was already soaked from the rain. His perfectly styled hair now stuck to his forehead, as if each drop were a confession that he had crossed a line he swore never to cross again. Lily, still trembling, pointed with her little hand down the left hallway while murmuring, "There, my mom is there." A nurse looked at them with annoyance, as if this scene were as common as the drops falling outside. But something in Daniel's gaze made him step back, as if he understood that this man was not like the others. The millionaire, without wasting time, threw a bill on the counter and demanded, "Take me to her." Now, in silence, they guided him to a small observation room. There, on an old stretcher, Elena lay with an IV hanging, and a monitor emitting a weak, almost resigned beat. Her breathing was a fragile thread, her skin pale, her lips still with that bluish tone that Daniel would never forget. He stood there motionless, observing that woman he had never seen, and who, without knowing it, was about to completely disarm him. There was something in her fragility, in her resigned stillness, that reminded him of himself on his worst days, when he also felt that no one would come for him. And that sharp pain that had pierced him in the car returned to beat with more force. The girl clung to her mother's hand, crying softly, "Mom, I brought help. He won't let you die." Daniel closed his eyes for an instant, fighting against something he didn't understand. It was absurd. He didn't know her. He had no reason to stay, and yet he couldn't turn his back. It was as if that girl had opened a door that had been closed for too long. The doctor entered shortly after, with a tired expression. "Without proper treatment, she won't make it through the night. We've done what's in our hands, but she needs something more than charity." Daniel, with his eyes fixed on the unconscious woman, responded with dangerous calm, "I don't care how much. Do it. Whatever it takes." just save her." The doctor looked at him, with respect for the first time before leaving to prepare the procedure. Lily, still in tears, lifted her enormous eyes to him and whispered, "Thank you, sir." But Daniel didn't respond. He didn't know if that gratitude belonged to him. All he felt was a growing sensation of vertigo, as if by saving her, he was losing himself. The hours that followed were slow, heavy like the rain that continued hitting the windows. Daniel stayed in a corner of the room, in silence, watching Elena's fragile body, and the stubborn hope in Lily's eyes. No one asked him anything. No one dared to interrupt him. At some point in the early morning, while the doctors did their work, Lily fell asleep in a chair, with her head resting on the edge of her mother's stretcher, and Daniel, who had promised never to feel anything again, couldn't take his eyes off them. Perhaps it wasn't just her mother who was fighting to survive that night. Perhaps he was too. But he couldn't know that this decision, impulsive and absurd, would be just the first crack in the wall he had built his entire life. As the night advanced, and the doctors moved with surgical precision, a question lingered in his mind. Why can't I leave? Why do I feel tied? In the darkness, without anyone noticing, Daniel felt for the first time in years something that didn't resemble fear or loneliness. It resembled hope. And at dawn, when the first rays filtered through the window, he was no longer exactly the same man who had entered through that door. Dawn arrived like a luminous wound over the gray city. The streets were still wet, mist floated over the rooftops, and the hospital smelled of cold coffee and sleeplessness. In the room where Elena fought for her life, Daniel remained motionless in the same chair, with his elbows resting on his knees and his gaze fixed on the floor. He had spent the night watching her pale hands, her sunken cheeks, and wondering why he had decided to stay. Every time he tried to convince himself that it was just charity, or a simple impulse, the girl's voice returned to pierce his mind. "Don't let my mom die." Lily woke up shortly after. Her braids were disheveled, and her eyes still swollen from crying so much. She rubbed her eyelids and looked for him with her gaze, as if she feared he had disappeared while she slept. Seeing him there, motionless, she exhaled a silent sigh and returned to take her mother's hand. Is she going to get better?" Lily asked in a thread of voice, without looking up. Daniel took time to respond. He wasn't used to promising anything he couldn't guarantee, but there was something unbearably cruel about leaving that girl without a spark of hope. "She's in the hands of the best doctors," he finally murmured. "They'll do everything possible." She nodded slowly, without letting go of her mother, and for an instant, Daniel allowed himself to observe them without armor. There was something in that scene, the girl clinging to that broken woman, that reminded him of his own childhood, of the night when his mother also needed him, and he couldn't do anything. The hours advanced with the slowness of a broken clock. Doctors came and went, checked monitors, murmured terms that neither he understood, nor wanted to understand, until one of them appeared with a somber expression. "The patient is stable, but her condition remains critical. We've stopped the immediate damage, but her heart is weak. If she doesn't find the strength to fight, we don't know if she'll make it through the week." Daniel barely nodded. He knew what it meant. No matter how much money he put on the table, there were battles that money alone couldn't win. That night, when Lily finally fell asleep again, Daniel got up and went out to the hallway to get some air. He leaned his back against the cold wall, and closed his eyes. His mind was a whirlwind of images: the girl's tears, Elena's purple lips, the strange sensation of not being able to simply walk away. It was as if that unconscious woman had tied him to something bigger than himself, as if rescuing her was also rescuing the broken child he had been. He looked through the hallway window. The sky was still cloudy, but a thin strip of light filtered between the clouds, and for the first time in a long time, he thought that maybe there was still something worth saving in his own soul. While watching the girl sleep next to the stretcher, a question pierced his chest. How far would you be willing to go for someone you don't even know? Leave me your answer in the comments. I want to know, would you risk your heart to save someone else's? That night, while the city returned to normalcy outside, he decided to stay, not out of compassion, nor out of charity, but because he felt that this woman and her daughter were his only chance at redemption. When he returned to the room, Lily looked at him between dreams and barely smiled, and it was that smile, fragile, but full of trust, that finished sealing his fate. Daniel took his seat again, and although the clock marked 3 in the morning, he wasn't planning to move from there. Not until that woman opened her eyes, because something inside him had already awakened. The dead hours of early morning gave him space to remember, and when one remembers, it inevitably hurts. Daniel stayed there sitting, with his back straight, and his gaze lost in the emptiness of the room. While Elena's breathing marked the rhythm of an invisible clock, the girl slept curled up on the chair, clutching her mother's sheet as if, by letting go, life itself could escape. And he remembered. It was impossible not to when he saw her so defenseless, and the little one with so much faith placed in someone who didn't deserve it. Because Daniel had been that same creature once, sitting in the emergency room of another hospital, with fingers stained with dried blood and a broken heart. He was barely 13 when he watched his mother die after no one helped them. Not the doctors, not the family, not anyone. That was the day he swore he would never depend on anyone else again. That money would be his shield, and solitude, his salvation. Since then he became an expert at closing doors and building walls. Never again did he allow anyone to see him weak. Never again did he trust enough to give his heart. In business he was ruthless. In personal life, a ghost. The women who passed through his bed never touched anything deeper than his skin. And friends were left behind when they understood there was nothing to share with him. That's how he survived. Or at least that's what he believed. But now, sitting next to that stretcher, the past reached him like a whip. In Lily he saw the child he was. In Elena the woman he could no longer save. And no matter how much he tried to convince himself that he was only there because he could pay the bill, he knew it wasn't true. Something in that unconscious woman called to him. Something in that girl's innocence gave him back the reflection of a man he once dreamed of being. And although it scared him more than any stock market crash or business betrayal, he couldn't look away. The nurses came and went in silence, respecting the quiet of the moment. No one dared to ask him anything. No one dared to treat him like a common client. There was something in his figure, the contained tension in his jaw, the way his fist closed over his knee, that told them that man wasn't there out of obligation, but for something much deeper. At one point, Lily woke up and found him with his gaze fixed on the ceiling. She walked to him barefoot with soft steps and sat beside him. "Are you scared too?" she asked, suddenly, with the brutal honesty that only children know how to have. Daniel blinked, surprised. He didn't know how to respond, but finally, and for the first time in years, he told the truth. "Yes." Lily barely smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. A simple small gesture, but one that seemed bigger to him than any deal he had closed in his life. The girl fell asleep like that, leaning on him, and Daniel didn't move. He felt that somehow, she was holding something inside him that he didn't even know still existed. When dawn came, and the golden light entered through the blinds, he had already made a silent decision. He wouldn't leave. He wouldn't allow that woman to die. Not for her, but for himself. Because something inside him, deep and forgotten, was lighting up. The sound of the monitors, the smell of disinfectant, the shadows of his own past, everything mixed in a whirlwind he could barely understand. But for the first time in many years he felt he wasn't alone. And that scared him more than anything. The 5th morning since he had brought her to the hospital dawned with a thread of hope. Daniel hadn't moved from the hospital since that first night. He slept right there, in the chair next to the stretcher, always in his suit, though each day more wrinkled, his beard more grown, his face more tired. People in the hallway already looked at him with curiosity. Some murmured he was a brother, others said he was a businessman who had made a mistake, and a few, with that cruel intuition of strangers, suspected he was hiding a sin he was paying in installments. But the truth was simpler, and more complex. Elena had improved barely. The doctors noticed some stability in her heart, though she remained weak. She slept deeply most of the time, with just the occasional whisper or movement that made Lily jump with joy. "Mom," the girl said every time her mother sighed. clinging to her hand with the strength of someone who knows no other faith than their own, and Daniel watched them from his corner. He felt something strange in his chest every time the girl smiled at him, or told him a clumsy story about her life in that neighborhood forgotten by the world. Lily had made it a habit to sit beside him while her mother slept, and together they watched the rain fall through the window, or listened to the murmur of the hallways. That morning, while dewdrops still pearled the glass, she settled in his lap without asking permission, and pulled a folded sheet from her backpack. "Look," she said, "it's a drawing." It was a wrinkled paper, where she had drawn her mother lying on a stretcher, herself standing beside her, and him, Daniel. She had drawn him, with a big black suit and a huge smile. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't know what to do. He took the drawing with trembling hands, and looked at it for a long time. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "I don't look so much like this," and sketched a sad smile. Lily returned his gaze, with that painful frankness that only children know how to have. "Yes, you just don't know it yet." The phrase left him silent for minutes. There was something in that creature that disarmed him inside, without asking permission. The doctors interrupted the moment with lukewarm news. Elena remained stable, but would need more days of intensive care. They couldn't guarantee anything. Daniel, as always, nodded and asked how much it would cost. The numbers no longer mattered to him. He signed everything without even reading, because deep down he knew none of that had a price. Neither Lily's faith, nor the life that still beat weakly in that woman. That night, after Lily fell asleep beside him, Daniel kept looking at the drawing. He kept it in his jacket pocket, like an amulet. And as he closed his eyes, he felt something deep was changing in him, because he was beginning to fear what would come next. And you, if you were in his place, would you be able to let yourself be touched by someone, even knowing it could break you inside? The sixth day dawned with a different sound. It wasn't the soft beeping of the monitor, or the tired steps of the nurses. It was a phone vibrating in Daniel's jacket. It was his personal assistant, from across the city. "Sir," she said with a hesitant voice, "we have a problem. A man came to your office today looking for someone named Elena, asking if you were hiding her here." Seethed, desperate, or violent. Daniel frowned. "Who was it?" he asked calmly, though his stomach tensed. He wouldn't give his name, but he didn't seem like a simple acquaintance. He was shouting that she owed him, that no one could hide her from him. Daniel's silence was long and dangerous. He hung up without another word, and put the phone in his pocket, saying nothing. But that morning, when he entered the room and looked at the woman on the stretcher, a different shadow crossed his gaze. Hours later, the doctors announced that she would finally wake up, and she did, slowly, clumsily, with a whisper that was barely a thread of voice. "Lily, where is my girl?" The little one burst into tears and hugged her without thinking. Daniel watched from the foot of the bed, motionless, with his arms crossed, but his gaze was fixed on Elena, who looked at him for just a few seconds, and in her eyes there was no gratitude, there was fear. He didn't take long to notice it. Every time Lily left the room, Elena looked at him with the same expression, as if he were as dangerous as the man who was now looking for her. Until finally one afternoon, when the girl was sleeping, she spoke. "You had no right to do this," she murmured, with her broken voice. "You don't understand what you're getting into. Explain it to me," he asked, dryly. She turned her gaze to the window, with contained tears. "I owe a man things I can't pay with money. If he knows I'm here, he'll come for me. He'll come for her." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Then let him come," he responded, with a thread of rage he didn't even recognize in his own voice. But Elena looked at him with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "You don't understand. That man doesn't negotiate. He doesn't forget, and he has nothing to lose." The air in the room became dense, almost unbearable. The woman who until then had been just a helpless shadow, now revealed herself as someone with a darker history than he had imagined. And for the first time since he had met her, Daniel felt fear. Not for himself, but for Lily. He went out to the hallway to get air and pressed his forehead against the cold wall. He felt strange, vulnerable, as if the ground had become fragile under his feet. because now it wasn't just about saving her, now it was also about protecting her, and protecting that girl who slept in the chair, oblivious to the storm that was approaching. That night, when he returned to the room, Lily opened her eyes and smiled, extending her hand to him. He took it without hesitation, because no matter how much he tried to convince himself that he shouldn't get involved, he knew it was too late to turn back. As the hallway lights flickered, and the rain returned to the city, Daniel silently promised that whatever it cost, no one would touch that girl or her mother while he breathed. Even if it meant breaking all his own rules, it was inevitable. He always knew it. Alina had barely spent 2 days conscious, and although the fragility of her body was still evident, her eyes no longer showed the same resignation as before. Now there was fear, a fierce, almost animal fear, every time the hospital phone rang or heavier footsteps were heard in the hallway. But that night, danger stopped being a distant threat. It became flesh and blood. It was almost 10 o'clock when a sharp knock echoed on the room door. Daniel was in his usual chair, with Lily sleeping on his lap. He got up immediately, feeling the protective instinct run down his spine like electricity. "Who is it?" he asked, with icy calm. The door opened violently before he could react. A tall man entered, broad-shouldered, with a leather jacket and a scar that crossed his cheek like a badly healed lightning bolt. His eyes were 2 dark pools full of resentment. Behind him 2 more men, less imposing but equally threatening. "Finally," murmured the man with the scar, with a crooked smile upon seeing Alina. "Did you really think you could hide?" Alina let out a muffled moan and recoiled in the bed. Lily woke up startled, clinging to Daniel's arm without understanding anything. Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself between them. "She's not going anywhere. Don't touch her." The man's laughter filled the room. "And who are you?" "The hero of the moment. You think you can buy everything with your bills." "I don't think it," Daniel responded with a low voice. "I know it." The man took another step, his boots resonating like blows on the tile. "This woman belongs to me. Not for money, for debts of another kind. You have no idea who you're messing with." Daniel didn't look away. His own rage was an icy fire that kept him standing. "And you have no idea how little I care." The silence that followed was heavy, dense, suffocating, until the man smiled again and leaned toward him, so close that Daniel could smell the smoke on his breath. Isn't over." And just as he had entered, he left. But the threat lingered in the air like an invisible poison. Alina covered her face with her hands, trembling, and Lily didn't let go of Daniel's arm for a second. He lifted her in his arms and held her against his chest, as if that were enough to protect her from the whole world. That night, when the hospital returned to its usual calm, Daniel went out to the hallway balcony, and lit a cigarette he didn't smoke. He let it burn out in his fingers, with his gaze fixed on the distant lights of the city, because something in him had changed forever, and it was no longer just about saving them. Now it was about fighting for them, even if it destroyed him in the process. If you too have ever felt that silent fury that makes you capable of anything for someone, give this story a like, right now, because it's in the darkest moments when one discovers who they really are. And that night, Daniel discovered it, when he returned to the room and saw Lily sleeping on her mother's bed. He knew there was no turning back, that the man with the scar would return, but he also knew that this time, he wouldn't find him alone. The clock marked 3 in the morning, when the storm finally broke over the city. Lightning tore the sky, and rain fell violently, as if even the weather sensed what was about to happen. Daniel hadn't closed his eyes since the visit from the man with the scar. Inside him, a plan was forming like a well-calculated chess piece. He couldn't allow that monster to return to the hospital. He couldn't expose them to more fear. He knew that if he wanted to put an end to that nightmare, he would have to do it now, before it was too late. At 5 in the morning, while Alina slept and Lily rested embracing her, Daniel received a call, an address, a time, a final warning. "If you want me to leave them alone, come alone." He hung up without hesitation, and left the room in silence, without saying goodbye. He knew there wouldn't be enough words to explain what he was about to do. He knew he might not come back, but he also knew it wasn't just his life that was at stake anymore. The place was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, dark, humid, with an aroma of rusted metal and fear. There the man with the scar waited for him, surrounded by his thugs, smoking a cigarette that glowed like an ember in the darkness. "I knew you'd come," he said with a crooked smile. "The question is, what do you bring to offer me?" Daniel looked at him steadily, and walked until he was a couple of meters away from him. He wasn't afraid. "Not this time. Whatever you want. My money, my companies, my name, whatever. But you leave them alone, forever." The man's laughter echoed off the empty walls of the warehouse. "You know what's funniest? That you think this is about money. That you still think you can buy other people's dignity." "Yes." Daniel didn't look away. "I don't care what you want. Take it from me. But don't touch them." The man put out his cigarette and threw it on the floor. He slowly approached until he was in front of him, and murmured, "Perfect. We'll see if your word is worth more than your life." What happened next occurred too quickly. A brutal blow to the stomach doubled him over. Another to the face made him fall to his knees. He didn't defend himself. He didn't raise his hands. Each blow was part of the price. Each punch was a promise kept. The man with the scar lifted him by the neck and looked at him with disdain. "I want you to remember this when you look in the mirror. You're not a hero. You're just another idiot with money." He threw him to the ground like a broken doll. Daniel spat blood and breathed deeply. "Sit." Even so, even on the verge of fainting, he smiled. "But she is still alive. That is all that matters." The man looked at him one last time before turning on his heels and disappearing into the darkness. His men followed him, leaving the echo of their steps and Daniel's battered body on the cold concrete. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. He didn't know. He only felt the unbearable weight of his bones and the heat of blood sliding down his shirt. But when he finally managed to stand up and go out into the rain, a certainty burned in his chest. He had kept his promise. He returned to the hospital at dawn, staggering, covered with bruises and mud, his shirt torn and his dignity intact. When he entered the room, Elena opened her eyes and looked at him with horror. "What did you do?" she whispered, tears welling up without remedy. Daniel didn't respond. He just approached the bed, took Lily's hand, who looked at him as if he were the bravest man in the world, and squeezed it tenderly. Because in his silence was the whole answer. He had done what was necessary. He had saved the only thing still worth saving. The hospital seemed different that morning. For the first time in days, the light entering through the blinds didn't seem gray, but warm. The air smelled of hope and of stillness. Daniel woke up in the same chair, with an improvised bandage over his eyebrow, and his lips still split. Lily slept on his lap, her small body curled against him, as if he were her natural refuge. And for an instant, that instant when the world still hasn't finished waking up, Daniel felt something like peace. When he fully opened his eyes, he noticed that Elena was looking at him. She had woken up earlier, and was watching him in silence. For the first time since he had met her, her eyes didn't reflect fear nor distance, just gratitude, and something more. He tried to stand up, but she gently shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Stay." He obeyed. He sat down again, somewhat breathless, unable to hold her gaze too long. He had faced blows, threats, humiliations, and yet that woman's words disarmed him more than any punch. "I don't understand why you did all this," she said, her voice as fragile as a whisper. He swallowed. He felt that each syllable was an abyss from which he might not be able to emerge. "Because when she," he said, pointing to Lily, still asleep, "asked me not to let you die, something in me woke up, and I couldn't ignore it anymore." Elena looked away. Tears began to run down her cheeks. "I'm not good company. I'm not what you deserve." Daniel leaned toward her, with his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze lit with fierce sincerity. "And I'm not the man she drew on her paper, but maybe we can learn together to be." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of meaning, full of an unspoken promise. Lily woke up then, stretching lazily and smiling to see them so close. "Mom, do you feel better?" she asked with an excited thread of voice. Elena nodded, stroking the girl's hair, and Daniel, without thinking too much, put his hand over theirs. The three intertwined their fingers for an instant, such a simple gesture, but so definitive. The nurses entered later, to do routine checks, and Lily took the opportunity to jump out of bed and go look for juice, leaving them alone. Daniel stayed still, watching her leave, and when the door closed, he finally gathered the courage to say it. "You don't have to be alone anymore." She looked at him surprised, but didn't interrupt him. "If you want, I can stay, not because you need me, but because I want to, because since that night, when I heard that small voice begging for you, my life stopped being mine." Elena's eyes shone. She didn't respond, she just slid her hand over his and squeezed it tightly, closing her eyes, as if she wanted to retain that moment forever. Daniel smiled for the first time, really, the calm and honest smile that Lily had drawn without knowing it days before. In that instant, he understood that everything, each wound, each defeat, each shadow, had brought him here, to her, to them. And although the world outside remained the same, he was no longer the same. Spring came early that year. The neighborhood where shadows once reigned seemed different under the soft light of the sun. The balconies showed flowers, children ran on the sidewalks, and the air had that sweet aroma of things being reborn. Daniel walked down the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets, his suit no longer as impeccable, or as dark as it used to be. On his face, a new serenity. In his gaze, a brightness that didn't exist before. In front of the small building, Lily waited for him at the door, jumping with excitement with her backpack hanging from her shoulder. Elena appeared behind her, healthier than ever, her loose hair swaying in the wind, her eyes full of that light he had seen go out and slowly return to shine. "You're late," she joked, with a smile that still made his heart race.
"I arrive,"
he replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. That had been the promise after all, to always arrive. No matter the time, no matter the fear, to be there. Lily ran to hug him, and he lifted her in his arms as he used to do. "Today is my first day at the new school," she announced proudly. "And you're not going to be late," said Daniel with a laugh, setting her down while taking Elena's hand. The three of them walked together down the sidewalk, like a small family that had found itself in the middle of chaos. People looked at them sideways, not quite understanding how that elegant man in a suit fit with the humble mother and the girl with braids. But they didn't need explanations. At the avenue crossing, Elena stopped for a moment to look into his eyes, and in her gaze, Daniel read everything that no longer needed to be said. "Thank you, sorry, stay." And he smiled, because there was no turning back, because he had learned that not all battles are won with money, and not all happy endings are written in contracts. Some are written with small acts, with closed wounds and intertwined hands. As cars passed in front of them, and the city vibrated around them, Daniel thought about that rainy night, about the fogged glass of the car, about that small voice saying, "Sir, don't let my mom die," and he knew that plea hadn't just saved Elena, it had also saved him, because sometimes one decision is enough to change an entire life. And if you too believe that we all deserve a second chance, that we can all redeem ourselves even when we believe there's no light left, subscribe to this channel right now, so you don't miss more stories like this, because you never know on which corner, at what moment, your destiny might find you. Daniel looked at Elena, then at Lily, and knew finally, that he was exactly where he should be, where he had always belonged.